It's good to see you all. It's really great to see you all. So, my name is Nellis, as Ethan said, Nellis Kennedy-Howard, and I'm grateful to be here speaking with you all again today. It's just been a tremendous blessing to be able to do this every single time. Um, so, for those who don't know, I am 9 months pregnant. In case you've been living under a rock or if you just haven't been around me, it's all I can talk about. It is the only thing I can talk about, and it's getting worse and worse as I guess time goes on. It's all I can think about. It's all I can focus on is being 9 months pregnant and just excited to bring my little girl into this world. It's a very exciting time, and it's also a very unusual time. So I find myself on the internet, and I find myself thinking about, what does the baby need? What does our little girl need? And wanting the very best for her. I'm thinking about strollers, right? What is the coolest stroller out there? What is the best stroller out there? I'm reading all of these reviews about strollers. What is the safest crib? What is the safest car seat you can have? And just wanting the very best for her, and I haven't even met her yet. I'm reading reviews online for pacifiers or for diaper balm. And if you're ever bored, go read reviews for diaper balm. It's really quite funny. But I want the very best for my little girl. And as I think about all of these things that I want for her, I've also been thinking about what are the big things that I want for her, right? There's all these small things, but what are some of the big things? What kind of world do I want my daughter to live in? And I think about things like, I would love for my daughter to have equal pay for equal work, right? That's a small thing. Now, it feels kind of like a big thing to me. As a Native woman, I want my daughter, who's also going to be a Native woman, to be equitably compensated for the work that she does. You see, Native American women are actually paid 58 cents on the dollar for every dollar paid to a white male. 58 cents, which means that Native women have to work 22 months to make what white men make in 12 months. That's a lot. And it's also not shocking to me. I remember being an adamant, stubborn 17-year-old who, at one of my first jobs, I found out that there was a younger boy who was doing the exact same job that I was, and he was making 25 cents more an hour than I was. And I demanded to my boss, I've been here longer, I'm older, I've been doing this longer, I should get the same amount of pay. And they said no, and I quit at the age of 17. I don't want my daughter to have to deal with that. I also think about affordable and decent health care. Right? This wacky and wild notion that, that healthcare is a basic human right that everyone deserves. And that's what I want for my daughter. In times where people are actually rationing their insulin because healthcare costs are so high, or when shows like Breaking Bad exist and they don't seem that far from reality, we might have a healthcare problem. And I also want whatever health care my daughter has access to be decent, right? I know that many of the people in my family, including myself many times in my life, have relied solely on Indian health services. So Indian health services, sometimes known as IHS, is a form of federal health care that's provided to Native American people. And that health care was actually secured through the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors through treaty in exchange for land. And so federal health care, and I remember going to the doc at IHS one time, and the doctor there refused to prescribe me iron for my anemia because in this population of Native American people, he doesn't believe they can be trusted with their own livers. I don't want my daughter to have to face those type of healthcare challenges. I just don't. I also have this wild dream that my little girl, when she comes into this world, and then when she starts to, scuttle off to school and, she's going to school for the first time, that I don't have to worry about getting her a bulletproof backpack, right? I want her to be safe. She don't have to fear for things like gun violence. My wife and I, we took an infant, we've been taking all these classes in preparation for having a kid. It should give you some type of degree for it. We took an infant and adult CPR class in the last couple of weeks to get certified of, how to take care of your kids. And I'll tell you what, the instructor focused a lot on the CPR and the first aid not being for little kids, but actually what to do in school shootings. I don't want my daughter to have to worry about those things. I also want her to be free of any fear for sexual predators or violence. Native women suffer drastically higher rates when it comes to sexual violence. In fact, one in three Native American women are raped in their lifetime. 1 in 3. 3 in 5 are physically assaulted. And 80% of those instances that occur on Native lands, the sexual predator is actually non-Native, meaning he's exempt from tribal law or prosecution. That's huge. Few women in this country have not experienced some type of sexual harassment. I know that for me, myself, I've gone through a lot. I've had men stalk me for months at a time and take photos of me without my consent. I've had convicted felons stalk me from prison. These are things that I don't want for my little girl. I want her to grow up in a beautiful world where she doesn't have to worry about those things. I also, we hear quite a bit about the bullying epidemic that's happening in our schools today, right? Of kids who aren't feeling safe at school. 40% of children raised by LGBTQ parents are harassed at school. 40%. And 23% of children who have gay parents say that they feel unsafe at school due to their family structure. And I want our little baby girl who's going to go off to school in several years, who has 2 mothers, to not have to worry about that. I want her fears when she goes off to school is to be about her education, right? About what is she learning in school? That's what a little kid should have to worry about, not about bullying. I also think about, I want my daughter to have a clean environment. I don't want her to live down the street from fracking sites. I don't want her to live at the corner of Refinery Central. I really want her to have clean air and clean water. So all of those reviews that I'm doing about cribs and pacifiers and diaper bombs, those are the little things, but the big things that I want, those are pretty big. I mean, those are things that I've been thinking about and praying about for a long time. And all of this makes me think about, what does God want for his children? Right? I don't know anything about my little girl. I don't. I've seen her on ultrasounds. I see she has hair. But I don't know who she is. I haven't met her yet. I have this beautiful thing in mind of I want her to have the best of the best. But God, who knows us and who made us and knit us together in our mother's wombs, he has glorious plans for us. He wants the very best for us. So as much as I want all of these things for my baby, God wants more for his children. And in the book of Isaiah, God actually speaks through the prophet Isaiah to tell his children of Israel, sharing what his children of Israel can do to fully enjoy all of the plans that God has in store for them. So who is Isaiah? Isaiah is one of the major prophets in the Bible. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Isaiah today. So he's one of the major prophets in the Bible. He's a poetic prophet for justice. He's delivering messages from God. He's an intermediary. He's in constant contact with the Lord. And he has very easy access to kings. He's always there. And he emphasizes that political leaders ought to have a moral, ethical, deep responsibility to those who are governed. That political leaders themselves should feel an obligation to the people that they govern. And the theme of the book of Isaiah is that God is exhausted. He's tired. He's sick and tired of the ritualistic and religious practices of political leaders. And that instead of all those practices, what he really wants is behavioral, and transformative change. Isaiah was written over the course of 50 to 60 years. Now, for those who have been around for 50 to 60 years, what have you seen happen with political leaders in that course of time? Quite a bit, right? In that time, Isaiah saw Israel being at times of peace, times of humiliation, and even in times of enslavement, all the while watching the political leaders and watching Israel go through all of that and being in touch with God and knowing that God has so much more in store for them, that he has beautiful plans that he wants them to realize. So, what do we know about the book of Isaiah? Isaiah is the first of the written prophetic books. He is the most quoted prophet in all of the New Testament. In fact, some of your favorite verses you've probably come from Isaiah. Verses like, though your sins be as scarlet, they will be as white as snow. He was pierced for our transgressions. You will soar on wings like eagles. Those are all different scriptures that come from the book of Isaiah. And Isaiah, when he's writing the book, he actually kicks off the book in a really unique way. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1, he says, this is the vision. This is the vision that the Lord gave me about the dark times that Israel is going through because of the troubled leadership that exists. And he names off the kings that are ruling during that time: Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. Leaders who were lukewarm in their faith at the best of times and wickedly corrupt at the worst of times. And you might be saying to yourself, yeah, but Nellis, political leaders, aren't they kind of corrupt anyway? Let's say that you're a cynic. Maybe it's just me. But let's say that you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but political leaders are like that. Well, Isaiah actually gives explicit examples of what the political leader's corruption looks like. So here's some of the examples that he gives. Throughout the book of Isaiah, Isaiah gives tons and tons of examples of how the political leaders of the day are corrupt. So I listed a few of them here along with the verses in case you want to follow along. The first one is that political leaders were friends of thieves and crooks engaged in bribery. That these political leaders pardoned the guilty for bribes or because of self-benefit. That these leaders were liars who present themselves without integrity. That these leaders were instigating and stirring up oppression with lies. Now, for me, when I see these examples in the book of Isaiah, I think about a lot of things, but I think about first thing in the morning. I don't know if others have this habit. First thing in the morning where you pull up your favorite news app, or maybe perhaps your favorite social media feed to see what happened, what's going on in the world today. Or maybe you turn on the TV to your favorite news station in the morning, or perhaps you're a creature of habit and you still get a printed copy of the newspaper and you read that. And for me, when I see these things, I don't know about you, but I see a lot of parallels to today. I see a lot of parallels to today's headlines. And I don't know if other folks feel like that, but these feel very much like headlines that you would see today. Headlines of leaders ally themselves with thieves. Leaders are engaging in bribery. They're pardoning the guilty. They're leading without integrity. Leaders who spread lies through misinformation and incite violence. For me, I see a lot of parallels, right? Isaiah is a political book. Lauren designed this series that we're kicking off today, and it's called Jesus for President, right? That's the series that we're starting. Now, before anyone panics, I'm not going to condemn any political party. I'm not even going to ask you to vote for X candidate or on this issue or another. Don't think that that's where I'm heading with this. Instead, I think it makes sense for us to recognize that God has beautiful plans for each of us. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11, Jeremiah talks about God's plans, how God has plans to prosper us, not to harm us, to give us hope and to give us a future. God has beautiful plans for all of us. And our ability to enjoy all that God has in store for us is deeply impacted by the politics of our day, right? Meaning the politics of today have an impact on our ability to enjoy the many freedoms and justice that God wants to offer to each of us. The Bible is not partisan, but it is political. Just as I think about how my life as a queer woman of color is inherently political, because I have this wild notion that I should have equal rights and equitable access to opportunities. It's inherently political. So what does God say? So God is speaking through Isaiah, and Isaiah is talking about how corrupt the times are. What does God say to the prophet of Isaiah, through the prophet Isaiah, to his child Israel? What guidance does he give them so that his children and that the political leaders of the day can fully realize all that he has planned for them? And it's really quite simple. This is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 16 and 17. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Encourage, defend, and rescue the oppressed. It's so simple, right? I mean, this is very plain language. I think about this, and I think about how this is almost like a conversation you'd hear on a playground with a kid, right? Of like, stop doing wrong. Learn to do what is right. Seek justice. Defend, encourage, and rescue those who are being oppressed or harmed. It's so simple. There are two words that appear repeatedly throughout the book of Isaiah. They're two Hebrew words. And so I began to look into what these words mean, particularly when they appear together. And they appear all throughout the book of Isaiah. And when I started to look into what these two words meant, I came across some writings from Rabbi Sachs, who talks about what these words mean, and it kind of piqued my interest, so much so that I called my friend Gila earlier this week. Gila is an Orthodox Jew who's married to a and I asked her, what do these words mean together? How do they relate to one another? And she confirmed much of what I had been reading about from Rabbi Sachs. You see, mishpat, and I'm probably pronouncing it a little bit wrong, but mishpat essentially means justice. It means even-handed justice. And then the second word here is tzedakah, which means charity or kindness and compassion. And that both of these words are really hard to translate into English. They appear repeatedly throughout the book of Isaiah, oftentimes paired together, and they're very difficult to translate to English because they mean so much more than that. In fact, when you combine them together and when they appear together, they actually mean social justice. That's what these words mean when they show up together in Scripture. So, throughout the book of Isaiah, God is demanding his children to act from a place of social justice. Now, is it really that shocking that God would want his children to promote justice for all society, for all people, and for not just some? That we have this moral obligation to care for one another, a responsibility to one another. That's huge, right? And if that's God's calling for us, if that's the recipe for how we can fully enjoy all that God has in store for us, and it remains applicable today, how do we know what injustice looks like? How do we recognize it? So I have some quotes here that I think that when we read them, you're probably going to say, yeah, those are clear examples of injustice. Those are very clear examples. Up here on the left, we have a quote from someone. It says, "You have killed most of us, and there is nobody left for you to kill. We want to stop here. We want peace." This is actually a quote taken from Hastine Begani, who in 1864 is speaking about the Navajo Long Walk. And I don't know if folks know much about the Navajo Long Walk, but it was actually an ethnic cleansing effort by the federal government, forcing Navajo people to walk hundreds of miles in the dead of winter. And in this quote, Mr. Begani, he is actually pleading to Colonel Kit Carson of, please stop marching us, stop hurting us. We want to go home. It nearly decimated my tribe. It nearly decimated my people. Tons and tons of people died on the Navajo Long Walk. This next quote is, "They ordered the first woman to lay down her child and to mount the auction block. She refused. While the cruel lash was applied to her back, she pleaded for mercy, but the child was torn from the arms of its mother." This is a quote from 1849 about slavery, from a man named Henry Bibb, who was a slave, who was speaking about what he saw at a slave auction. Down here in the bottom, we have another quote. It says, "At any time of night and day, poor helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared." This is actually a quote from Anne Frank in 1943, speaking about the traumas that occurred during the Holocaust. You have slavery, you have the Holocaust, you have the Navajo Long Walk, very clear examples of injustice, right? And in these instances, change did not come about on its own. It wasn't just that one day there was suddenly change that ended slavery or that ended the Holocaust. No, God utilized the tools, the skills, and the energy of his people to create change. People and leaders who stepped up and said, you know what? This has gone on long enough. I'm done. I'm going to invest of myself to make change, to stop it. I'm not going to just lift up prayers. I'm going to intervene to help create change. In the Holocaust, these leaders who intervened looked like people who were Oskar Schindler, right? Oskar Schindler, who saved over 1,000 Jews by employing them in his factories in Poland. Or Johann von Holst, who saved hundreds of Jewish children by hiding them in his school during the Holocaust. And for slavery, it was people like Frederick Douglass, who was an author and a political advisor, Harriet Tubman, who ran the Underground Railroad, or Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. For the Navajo Long Walk, it was Chief Manulito and Barboncito, who actually worked with the federal government to secure a treaty to end the Navajo Long Walk. All of these people who stepped up and said, you know what, this is what injustice looks like, and I'm done. I'm going to make change. Now, you might be saying to yourself, those are very clear examples of injustice, Nellis. But those are, 100 years ago. That type of injustice doesn't exist today. I have some more quotes for you. What does injustice look like today? So let's take a look at these. The one on the top left says, "The children are locked in their cells and cages nearly all day long. They can't bring themselves to play because they are trying to stay alive in there." This is actually a quote from Alora McCurgy, speaking about her visit to a migrant detention center in Clinton, Texas, just a few months ago. Here on the top right, we have another quote. In deplorable conditions, I was in numerous riots, various situations where I had to defend myself. I made a new word. It's called petranoid. I was petrified and paranoid at the same time. This is actually a quote coming from a man named Reggie Cole, who served 16 years in California State Prison for a murder he didn't commit before the judge overturned his case. And then we have another quote here. People sleep in our stairwells. They shoot up. They pee in bottles, and they put the lids back on and then leave them in our windowsills. And then they defecate in the laundry room garbage. This is a woman named Diane who's speaking about her experience living in project housing in Seattle just a couple of weeks ago. For me, I think about this, and do these circumstances seem like justice to you? They don't. They really don't. They sound so far from justice to me. They sound dehumanizing, inhumane. They sound so far from justice, and this injustice exists today. Now, the question is, for the previous slide, I was talking about the many people who showed up and intervened. I was talking about Frederick Douglass, Oscar Schindler, Harriet Tubman, the people who stood up and intervened. But whose names could I mention in these instances of today's injustice? Who's putting some skin in the game to say, I'm done, change needs to happen? Could it be one of you? That in 100 years someone is saying your name? Could it be me? How are we seeking justice and defending the oppressed today? Because that's what God was saying in the book of Isaiah. Seek justice, defend, encourage, rescue the oppressed. If that's our calling, if we want to fully enjoy God's plans for us, if my little girl, who is going to be born any day now, any hour now, if she's ever to enjoy all of the big plans and hopes and dreams that I have for her, what are we doing to create those conditions today? Because I know that for myself, I am not going to be a bystander in my daughter's future. I'm just not. I'm going to be a part of creating and changing the world that I want to see her be a part of. So, and I believe that that's God's calling for all of us, right? To create that change for not only this generation, but for multiple generations. So what do we do? What can a person do to seek justice today? There's lots of things you can do. Lots and lots of things that you can do. You can strike. Y'all might be like, Nellis, that's a big thing. If you're not going to strike, you can go to a march. There are billions of petitions out there right now. It's easy enough to add your name and say, this is what injustice looks like. I'm going to take action just by signing petitions. You can vote. For those of you who vote or who are able to vote, voting is an option. You can call your representative. I don't know how many of you have called your representative in the last year. Speed dial. Just like oftentimes there's a script. You can just leave a message. Call your representative. Let them know how you feel. You can donate to a good cause. There are so many places out there, so many groups that are doing wonderful work. If you can't do it yourself, donate to them so that they can make their work possible. But most importantly, I believe, is that you can get informed. You can pull up that news app every morning. You can pull up your social media, read the newspaper. Because I'll tell you what, injustice exists whether you know it or not. It's not enough for us to just put on blinders and say, I don't have to look, so I don't have to act. We need to be informed so that we can do exactly what God calls of us to do. So as you go about your week, as you go through this November, and as you go through the rest of the year, think about this verse. Think about what you can do to seek justice, to encourage, defend, and to rescue the oppressed.